All right. Thanks to you at home as well for staying with us for the next hour. There is a lot in motion right now in the news. We've got updates for you this hour on the killing of that district attorney and that assistant district attorney in that one county in Texas. Two separate and apparently targeted killings less than 100 miles from where the apparent killer of the Colorado prisons chief was himself killed in a shootout with police. We've got a bunch of developments in that situation today, including on the crucial issue of whether a white supremacist prison gang may be linked to these apparent assassinations. We've got election night results tonight from South Carolina. Those are coming up for you in just a second. The Kansas clinic that was run by Dr. George Tiller before Dr. Tiller was murdered by an anti-abortion activist 4 years ago. That clinic today in Kansas made its formal announcement that it is reopening for the first time in 4 years. In the guns debate, Connecticut moved forward today with the most ambitious and most unique package of gun reforms since the Newtown school massacre back in December. A vote is expected tomorrow in the Connecticut legislature. The governor says he will sign it. While today the NRA distinguished itself by having the stones to announce yet another plan for more guns in schools, while continuing to block everybody else's efforts to keep guns away from both schools and from madmen. President Obama today announcing a big new plan that some scientists are calling a moonshot, a big, ambitious scientific project of national significance that could change medicine, could frankly change the world if it works. Are we the kind of country that does stuff like that anymore? Can we be that kind of country again? Like I said, there's lots in motion in today's news, but we begin tonight with scandal. Good old-fashioned bribery and corruption scandal, complete with perp walks and politicians in handcuffs and envelopes of cash being passed at diners and in parked cars and secret wiretaps. Sometimes politics really is just an episode of The Sopranos, and today was one of those days. What happened today, actually, in terms of understanding the players and what they did, the easiest place to start is the 2012 election in New York State. It's kind of a weird one in New York State. You know that the governor of New York State is a Democrat and a very popular one, Andrew Cuomo. He was not on the ballot in 2012. He'd been elected 2 years earlier in 2010. Election night 2010, everything else in the country went Republican. But the New York governor's race that put Andrew Cuomo in office, that race was blue by 30 points. Then in 2012, Andrew Cuomo's not on the ballot. The only statewide races in New York were, of course, the presidential race, in which President Obama beat his opponent by 27 points. That was one of the biggest margins of any state in the country. The other statewide race in November 2012 in New York State was the Senate seat held by Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand beat her challenger by a 45-point margin. So, yeah, the political picture in New York State was just overwhelmingly Democratic, just solidly blue in terms of the 2012 election. But New York is a big state, a largely rural state, and a more ideologically diverse state than it sometimes gets credit for, thanks to its statewide election results. One of the manifestations of New York's unheralded diversity is that even though the state is so blue it looks cold in any statewide vote, when it comes to voting for state legislators, it's not nearly like that. The Senate in New York State, the Senate has only been in Democratic control 3 times since World War II. But on the election night, November 2012, on that hugely blue night in November, where President Obama beat Mitt Romney by a 27-point margin, under the leadership of a Democratic governor with the highest approval ratings of any governor in any state in the country, on that hugely blue night in November, where Kirsten Gillibrand embarrassed her Republican opponent. On that big blue night in New York, it looked like even the impenetrable fortress of the permanently Republican-dominated state Senate was going to come crumbling down and finally become blue as well. The Democrats looked like they won the Senate in November 2012 in New York. Democrats in November won 33 seats in the Senate. Republicans won 30 seats. So that means Democrats take over the Senate, right? Wrong. Even though the Democrats won a clear majority in the Senate, a subgroup of Democrats decided to peel off and caucus themselves with the Republicans instead, so the Republicans could keep control in the Senate. It was really weird. It was very weird at the time. When it happened, even before we found out what it was leading to today, it seemed like a weird thing. The New York Times said when it all happened that it was a particular coup for the breakaway faction of Democrats when they recruited a Democrat to their side who was the former leader of the Senate Democrats. Quote, they also recruited an additional Democrat to their caucus, Malcolm A. Smith of Queens, a former leader of the Senate Democrats, who has sought support from Republicans for a possible run for mayor of New York City. The breakaway faction of Democrats and Mr. Smith talked through the arrangement over a recent lunch of fried meatballs with peppers and onions at Enzo's in the Morris Park section of the Bronx. Well, today it was not fried meatballs with peppers and onions, but it was a shared arrangement between Senator Malcolm A. Smith and the Republicans who he thought could get him on the ballot as a Republican to run for New York City mayor. See, there are a lot more Democrats than there are Republicans in New York City. So it is a tried and true method to become a Republican specifically for the purpose of running for New York City mayor. It means you don't have a difficult primary, right? You have an easier primary if you're running as a Republican than you would if you were running on the Democratic side, even if you have been a lifelong Democrat. And that's how Mike Bloomberg got the mayor's job in the first place, right? Then once he was in, he ran as a Republican. Then once he was in, he dropped the Republican label and became an independent. But if you are a registered Democrat and you want to pull this, you want to appear listed as a Republican on the ballot in a New York City election, what you need is a majority of the Republican Party bigwigs in the city to sign off on you doing this. Yeah, we know you're a Democrat, but we'll sign this waiver allowing you to run as a Republican. We know why you want to do it. Well, when that Democratic state senator was arrested today, he was arrested alongside 2 other Democrats and 3 Republicans with whom he was allegedly conspiring to bribe his way into getting that permission from New York City Republican bigwigs so he could get onto the ballot, so he could get a shortcut to the mayor's race, so he could maybe end up running America's largest city. It was the Democratic state senator turncoat who helped give the other party, the Republicans, control of the state Senate. And it was the chairman of the Republican Party in the Bronx and the vice chairman of the Republican Party in Queens and a Republican city councilman and so on. 6 arrests and all the accompanying salacious details from the U.S. attorney today, who looked disgusted at what he had to explain to the public.
The complaint sets forth 3 bribery schemes involving cash payments of tens of thousands of dollars to elected officials and party leaders. Every New Yorker should be disheartened and dismayed by the sad state of affairs in this great state. From time to time, the question arises, how common is corruption in New York? I can tell you, based on the cases that we have brought and continue to bring, it seems downright pervasive. But don't take my word for it. Consider the words of City Councilman Daniel Halloran, caught on tape in this case. After allegedly receiving a $7,500 cash bribe, he says to the cooperating witness, and you can see it on the chart here again to my left, quote, money is what greases the wheels, good, bad, or indifferent. During that same meeting, Halloran allegedly says, quote, that's politics. It's all about how much. And that's our politicians in New York. They're all like that. And they get like that because of the drive that the money does for everything else. You can't do anything without the money. After the string of public corruption scandals that we continue to expose, many may understandably fear that there is no vote that is not for sale, no office without a price, and no official clean of corruption.
Money is what greases the wheels, good, bad, or indifferent. The quote from the Republican city councilman arrested today, along with 5 others. Feel dirty yet? How about the allegation that the Republican city councilman thought his big payoff for dealing with all the bribery was that he would get named New York City's deputy police commissioner? So if all the bribing worked out and his guy did succeed Mike Bloomberg as mayor, he'd get that big law enforcement job. My favorite detail from the complaint is where the vice chairman of the Republican Party in Queens apparently decided that the stuff they were talking about was so shady, it was so illegal, that he ought to take precautions. And so he decided in one of these meetings that he ought to pat down one of the guys he was talking with about the bribery details to see if the guy was wearing a wire. The guy who he was patting down was wearing a wire. He was an undercover FBI agent, and he did have a recording device on him to record those conversations, but the Republican guy missed it. He did not do the pat down well enough to find the wire, and the FBI agent just kept recording. What would have happened if he had found the wire? So that's part one of today's news that leaves you feeling like you want to shower in bleach. Part two involves this guy, Governor Ultrasound. We hardly knew ye, Bob. In a political context, Governor Bob McDonnell of Virginia is known for trying to portray a moderate Republican image while governing in Virginia from deep right field. That's how we got the nickname Governor Ultrasound. Now, on his way out of office, he is pushing yet more anti-abortion legislation in his state and has just signed new strict voter ID restrictions for his state, which may or may not be blocked by the Voting Rights Act if the Supreme Court allows the Voting Rights Act to survive. But thanks to new investigative reporting from the Washington Post, we also now know that Governor Ultrasound, on his way out of office, has found a whole new approach to making people feel dirty. The executive chef who Governor McDonnell hired to work at the governor's mansion when he was elected, was recently indicted in the state of Virginia for embezzlement. The chef left the chef's job at the governor's mansion amid a state police investigation that ultimately led to those embezzlement charges. But once he left the job of being Governor McDonnell's official governor's chef at the mansion, he still ended up cooking for him and at the governor's mansion. Specifically, the former chef's catering company ended up doing the $15,000 dinner when Governor McDonnell hosted his daughter's wedding at the governor's mansion. Now, hosting your daughter's wedding at the governor's mansion, that's the sort of thing that gets a lot of positive press attention, right? You get both earned media and the political press for that sort of thing, and you get the kind of attention that you cultivate yourself with a big public Facebook page full of photos from the event. But while the wedding was getting all that attention, the governor's spokesman took pains to say that the governor's family, was paying for all of the expenses associated with that event. Now, under questioning from the Washington Post, the governor's spokesman is changing that story, saying, actually, the governor's daughter herself paid for that $15,000 dinner. And by paying for it herself, what he means is that she, quote, paid for it by accepting it as a gift from one of Dad's campaign contributors. Since it was a gift, though, to the governor's daughter and not to the governor himself, there was no need to report this gift. The governor does admit to his campaign taking more than $28,000 in gifts from the same contributor in the form of private air travel, plus another $80,000 in private air travel donated to the governor's political action committee, plus another more than $9,000 worth of personal gifts to the governor, more travel and food and lodging and entertainment, again, not including his daughter's wedding. The contributor in question is the head of a company that makes this non-FDA-approved anti-inflammatory drug, which is made from something related to tobacco. This picture that we have next here, yes, that is reported to be Bob McDonnell holding their product up to the camera to have his picture taken with it. The governor's spokesman says the governor never authorized the company to put this photo of the governor with their product on the company's Facebook page. But the spokesman also says, yes, Governor McDonnell does enjoy taking the supplement. The company's launch party for its unapproved drug was also hosted by Governor McDonnell at the governor's mansion, paid for by the governor's political action committee. Same political action committee that accepted tens of thousands of dollars in gifts from that company. Pleasure doing business with you, sir. 3 days before the daughter's wedding, the governor's wife flew down to Florida to go to an investors conference for the company to tout the benefits of their tobacco-related wonder drug. The First Lady of Virginia 3 days before the wedding. Wow. The company has now reportedly received subpoenas from the U.S. Attorney's Office as part of an investigation thought to be related to transactions involving the company's stock. I should also note that among the significant stockholders of the company is the Republican nominee to succeed Governor McDonnell, a man named Ken Cuccinelli, who himself is now in trouble for having gone nearly a year without disclosing that he had those shares in that company. It's nice, right? Perp-walking, handcuffed politicians in a bribery scandal in New York, the campaign contributor secretly paying for the daughter's wedding at the governor's mansion in Virginia, then blaming the daughter, saying it was her relationship with this guy who's under investigation now. But oh, wait, there's more. Oh, wait, there's more. In case your second bleach shower of the last 11 minutes isn't enough, it's time for a third, because it's not just Governor Ultrasound and the astoundingly personal mutual generosity of his own family and his campaign contributor. It's not just envelopes full of cash being passed between politicians in parked cars in New York City. No, there's more just from today's news. Specifically from today's business pages, where we learned today that the outgoing chief of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the top cop, the top regulator on Wall Street, is leaving that top cop, top regulator job to go work for Wall Street. Mary Shapiro, having left her job as chair of the SEC, has decided to land very, very gently with a job at something called Promontory Financial Group, a Wall Street outfit that helps banks maneuver around the kinds of regulations that she was in charge of enforcing until about 5 seconds ago. Appointed to the job after the SEC did not catch Bernie Madoff, Mary Shapiro took over in the midst of the financial crisis. Her tenure there was marked by no executives from companies that caused that crisis getting perp-walked or handcuffed ever. And now, upon leaving, she joins the industry herself. Soft landing. She told the Wall Street Journal today that there should not be any, quote, revolving door concerns about what she's doing here because, quote, in my case, there is no revolving door. I won't ever be going back to government. Right. Government served its purpose in this case, setting you up for this Wall Street job. It should also be noted that the person replacing Mary Shapiro as the new top cop at the SEC is arriving there from the financial sector. So this is how it works, right? I'm in charge of enforcing the laws that keep you in check. Now my job is to help you get around those laws. Now my job is to enforce those laws. Now my job is to help you evade those laws. That's how it works, right? Money is what greases the wheels, good, bad, or indifferent. When Republican Scott Brown was in the United States Senate, his top campaign contributor was the financial sector. It was Wall Street. When he left the Senate, we learned subsequently that his new job was going to be working at the lobbying firm that represents Goldman Sachs. Around the same time, we learned that former Democratic Senator Ben Nelson was going to work at a top lobbying firm for the insurance industry. Who was Ben Nelson's top contributor while he was in office in the Senate? Oh, look at that, the insurance industry. Every time someone in politics, someone in Washington does this, it bolsters the expectation of everybody else still in Washington or anybody planning on ever heading to Washington in their career that if they use their time in office, if they use their time in politics to scratch some rich guy's back or some rich industry's back, there will be a nice soft landing arranged for them when they get out. It is everyday corruption. It is the everyday corruption that we are told we shouldn't even think of as corruption. What gets headlines is when it's a bunch of guys scheming over fried meatballs in the Bronx while somebody's wearing a wire, right? What gets headlines is when it's something as humiliating as your wife flying down to endorse the guy's product 3 days before you serve your 200 guests the fancy chicken dinner he bought you that you let everybody think you paid for your daughter's wedding, even though he paid for it. That's when it gets headlines, right? That's when it's very obviously scummy. That's when Bob McDonnell and all these New York politicians start to stink in the public's estimation. That's why people don't want to go into public service, frankly. But all of this is the same racket. All of this is. It's all cashing in for yourself and for the people who can buy access to you, while the public interest goes begging. Arrests and perp walks and investigations stop the New York and Virginia versions of this racket. But what stops the big version? What stops the Washington version that they tell us isn't corruption, it's just the way of doing business? What stops that? That's next.